Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to English Poetry at the Islamic University of Gaza. I hope that you all and your loved ones are safe and sound after yet another Israeli brutal attack on Gaza. Today we continue to work on romantic poetry. We go back to Shelley. We examined one of the most fascinating poems of all times. That's Ozymandias. I'll go back to Ozymandias. We'll do something else in addition to examining the poem, and I'll start with that. When we talk about poets, probably we mentioned this early in the course. Why poets? Why we need poets? What is it that poets do that others do not do? And let me ask you this question again. Do we really need poets in our societies, in our lives? Are they significant? Can we do without them? Can life be the same without poets? What is it that poets do to make life different or special or better or bad? Or can you live, like honestly, can you live a whole month or a whole year without reading a poem, listening to a poem, listening to a song, reciting a song? What is it that we find appealing? Why? Again, here basically I'm talking about other than the beauty of the language and the ingenious ways they employ literary devices and sounds and the way they word their stuff, their originality and everything. I'm talking about like ideas and thoughts and contributions to civilization, to society.
I think what we need from poets that they are having control over words. So in their words, like they have emotions and they evoke the emotions of other people. So they can convey a strong message that they want to the other people. And when the people's feelings move, then it will turn out to be action. So it is important for the people to improve their country and to improve themselves to hear the truth.
So okay, if you're talking about the ability to convey emotions and feelings in words, and then the ability to turn these words into action. Who does this? Like who does this generally in life, other than poets? Is it only poets who convey? Don't teachers sometimes do this? Don't parents do this? What is it that we feel special about poetry and about poets? Like a taxi driver could give you, could express his advice. No offense to taxi drivers, I'm just giving you an example. Yes. Okay, so there is this special thing about the deep analysis, the profound, the digging deeper and deeper rather than going for the superficial, mundane things.
I believe that, first of all, as Rizan said, some people have so much emotions, but they can't find the words. So literature in general, whether poetry or prose, gives you those words. Another thing is reading literature sometimes helps us overcome our troubles, because when we read literature, we feel that there are people who think the same way we do. We find that.
But again, doesn't this apply to other mundane things? If you are a parent, you have a shopping list to do, you have little money, you have too many things to buy, and you read it, could be a life-changing experience because the things. Is this the same? What's the difference between, like, say, a shopping list and a poem?
Shopping list is about materialistic things.
Okay.
So I don't know.
It didn't have feelings.
It's really different. There
I
are no
think-
feelings in a shopping list.
Okay, imagine a father, again, struggling, the economical situation around the world and how people are struggling to afford to put food on the table. And somebody realizes that he has to buy so many things. At the same time, he has or she has very little money. That's going to,
Yes. Teacher.
it's going to be like a poem.
Teacher. No, not this.
So what's the difference? Why do we have poets? What is the main job of a poet?
I think that poetry makes you feel responsible upon something yet you didn't feel responsible about it. Like defending the land or doing something good, or maybe make a charity. So you sometimes see a poor person and you didn't think to give her money or her. So poetry makes you to think about this. But when are we talking about a father who have a responsibility over his family, it's normal to feel responsible. So we don't need poetry to feel responsible about it. So poetry makes
So
us-
poetry doesn't change our relationships between, like if you have, don't you like your mom more when you read one particular poem, you listen to one particular
I have
song?
that in my heart.
But does this love increase, decrease? What,
Increase.
like, does poetry contribute to increasing,
It is
decreasing
original in
things?
my heart.
Please? Please, yes?
I think poets have the ability to say stuff that we feel but can't say. So like, yes, when you read a poem about like mothers in general, I can relate to the feelings, but I myself, it never occurred to me to say them this way. Like when I read them in a poem, yes, I get a sense.
Somebody
of
is speaking
comfort.
your mind, you know?
And like another thing, you said about like what's the difference between like a father who lectures you and like a poet who is also in a way or another lecturing in a poem. Well, it's different because like I think we choose to listen to the poem and like even if it was all dictated, full of stuff that
Preaching, yeah.
teaching, we still wouldn't like feel it this way because like we choose to listen to it and we like think of it more than when someone just comes to us directly and starts telling us do this and that and that.
So you're saying that here, sometimes when something is dictated to us, you know, when we're given orders, commands, we tend to, you know, to be reluctant to follow. But if something is written in such a way, in such an attractive, poetic way that speaks our minds, but at the same time does not make us feel that we're just blindly following somebody, it's this thing that answers some call from inside that makes you feel that it's special because you find poetry different.
Yes, I think even their arguments aren't like convincing in a way that they're decorated in a way to appeal to people.
Okay, but we do have other people who are as convincing as poets, don't we? So, but like, what is the main job of poets? If you are a poet, what would you be doing and why?
Poets are responsible to start things and they call people's attention to something. Or they make people pay attention to something that they are part of. For example, when I read a poem such as the incitement poetry or the resistance Palestinian poetry, I feel that yes, this poet is saying what I'm believing in. So the job of poetry.
So you're talking about two things here. Number one, the ability of many poets to defamiliarize things, to push us to reconsider things, even the very mundane, the things that we see every day but we don't, you know, pay attention to. And now the poets present these things in a way that attracts our attention, that makes us pause, think, and reconsider our position, our stances. And you mentioned another point, which is really very deep here, about how poets usually initiate. They start things. And this is something that mirrors Freud's famous statement, the poets were there before me. You know, Freud, psychoanalysis. When he was looking for examples to clarify, to illustrate his ideas about psychoanalysis and everything, he found himself almost always quoting literary works of fiction, drama, poetry. And he came to the conclusion that poets were there before me. All my ideas have been, in a way or another, expressed, mentioned, discussed, elaborated on by poets. And that's why he says, poets were there before me.
Actually, after this course, I feel like writing poetry is in the sake of writing poetry. This is the thing that and then it's up to you what you want to take from this poem. Actually, when we take some poems we like, we have different symbols from different perspectives. So I think this is the job of the poem.
Two.
right, to write, just to write poetry.
Okay,
And
yeah.
then it's up to the reader what he wants to take from this poetry.
Okay, this is depends. Some people believe that I'm writing just for the sake of writing. It's like there's something inside, I want to get it out there. I don't care what influence it's going to have on me or on other people. What I care about is, again, what I do. There's something. I usually use this stupid example, but it's like when a mom is pregnant, 9 months, a baby, and the baby has to get out. What happens next just has to get out. I don't know whether this is, in a way, similar to this situation of poets getting out poems, but that's not many people will agree that we write for the sake of writing, or even as self-expression. Many people read about poets, what they say, talk to poets, people who write poetry. That's why I try to assign you to write poetry. Okay, you feel the need to write because I want you to, but by time I hope that you find yourself, able to express yourself without having to be pushed into this by somebody. So again, we go back to the idea that poetry could be self-expression. There's a movement called art for art's sake. Why are you doing this? Why are you painting? Why are you writing this? I don't care. I just write. I think it's significant for me to write. I don't care what influence or impact. But then there will be many people who will say, no, poetry is a tool of, like you said here, of change, of revolution, of resistance, of probably teaching and delighting. More, please?
Like we can say that poetry is a self-expression and just for the sake of poetry, but poets always speak or write poetry about the feelings they experience, but most of people experience these feelings. So we got very emotional when we read poetry because
This universal thing about them, they touch our hearts. And sometimes you read a poem in a foreign language and you relate. You find it appealing. And sometimes you don't understand everything about like the words and but sometimes the tune helps with songs especially. Like you feel that this is, wow. We do this all the time. I posted on our Facebook page, Up the Wolves, something like this, a poem and a song. I was watching this show, I'm not going to mention. And in every episode or two, there's usually a song at a particular time. And I usually hear the song and I don't pay attention to, except this one particular thing. I paused, I went to Google and I Googled the song, I loved it. And this is what I'm talking about here. The ability of the poet or the poem to attract you, to say, stop, pause everything, wait, pay attention to me, I am now everything in your life. And you'll find it really beautiful in this way. Like, I know many of you wouldn't like to do this, wouldn't pause their lives, not what they're watching, and just think what a poem would do to you. And I hope this course is going to make you think many times about this, to stop for a word, for a stanza, for a phrase, for a poem, for a line of verse, and reconsider things. See how this is going to, what this thing is going to do to your life, to yourself. Please.
I think also the job of the poet, it's not to convey the message in an ordinary message. It should be in a
Witty way.
Yeah. For example, in the political problem, sometimes we don't need to express our feeling because of the government suppression. So the poets sometimes use simple like words or
true.
express the
True.
meaning in direct ways. So we can express our emotion without punishment from the government.
That's also true. And that's something that makes poetry special. You could still express yourself in a way, in an allegorical way. Ahmad Shawqi, Gharaz al-Thalab Yawman, and those very allegorical poets. You can escape political persecution.
I think another job, another post is to document history through their poetry.
Okay.
And this, yesterday, I was in the car with my dad, and there was a song on the radio here, Yo-Yo, that documents, it literally documents, the whole thing. It's just a song that lasts for 3 minutes. And this is so powerful that we can just learn about a whole nation through a poem.
That's true. That's true. One more?
I also believe that poetry and all literature in general ability to make us understand ourselves without feeling attacked.
Okay.
Like, so sometimes you'd be reading about a character and you'd say, wow, that character is horrible. And then all of a sudden it strikes you that I do this.
Mm.
So it makes us realize how
Like,
horrible
is this
we
again
are.
connected to that idea Nadia raised here, the fact that when people are preachy, we tend to be defensive.
Yeah.
You know, do, don't, do, don't, do, don't, do, don't. You feel exposed, true.
Yeah.
But a poet has the ability, a poem has the ability to capture your essence and to make you realize that, oh my God, this is about me. This is me. I am Ozymandias. I am this person or that person. Okay, one more question. Do you trust poets? Do you think poets are trustworthy?
Yeah.
They are? They're not? Okay, they're not, they are?
Feeling not the story.
Are they or are they not? Yes or no? Yes or no? Ooh, nice. Oh, it's okay, it's up to you. So, yes or no? Yes or no? Yes or no?
Yes, I think.
Yes or no? Yes or no? Yes or no? Yes or no? So most of you say no. Okay. Now, why? Why? Please.
I don't trust him like I don't trust myself with emotions and feelings.
Oh, okay.
And I feel like I'm not a static person. I could change from a period to another. So poets are human and
Okay.
they're not trustful.
What if you have a close friend who's a poet? Would you still trust? What in this person would you be trusting? Please.
The feelings being his feelings. It's not my feelings to trust him.
Mm.
I believe about what he can write in poetry. It's
Okay, most of you are saying him for the poet. It could be a she. So would you trust them more in this case? If this is honestly, if you're reading a poem for a female poet, would you take it more seriously? Would it? Please.
Okay, if she's a close friend of mine, I would I trust my friend, I not trust the persona that she builds in her poems. Because she has to use some embellished words and some embellished
Okay.
language, so she cannot.
So what is it that you don't trust poets about? Briefly, yes, please. In brief. Yeah.
Poets are talented in using puns and.
So is that good or bad?
No, it's bad, especially for the teenagers or the beginners in
Okay.
Learning.
So
They will believe what is shown in the poem.
uh-huh.
Yet the poets are giving the onset is more than the said.
Okay. So what do you think? Is that bad?
Clever people are
Because some people here are saying if you tell me everything, preach me everything, I'm not going to like it. If you do things by making me think, look for the truth, look for the idea, it would make you part of the poem, remember?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's true. I like this again expression. The unsaid is usually more than the said. Please.
I think maybe some poets can exaggerate the situation or their feelings.
Is that good or bad? Don't we all do that all the time? Don't we exaggerate when we hate somebody, when we like somebody, when you...
No, we should be honest, not exaggerate.
We should be, but we're not. Most often we're not. Yes, please.
I think poets sometimes try to immortalize things and erase other things. I remember once you told us that before Zionism came to Palestine, they were preparing in prose and poetry. So the poets can portray for the people what he wants. And Ozymandias is a great example. The reader of this poem, for the first time, he will be ready to understand, and later he will get the information about bad kings.
Okay. So again, you're generalizing here. If one poet is using poetry to deceive and trick, does that mean we need to distrust all poets?
No, but we need to be aware.
Well, that's very good. You need to be very careful. You need to be very cautious about what poets do with their poetry. True.
There is no solid answer, yes or no. I believe that it depends on the poet himself. But for example, there are a lot of poets that are idealistic and they portray relationships with people or like love relationships or friendships in a way that is so disconnected from the reality. And this is about how things will be in the future, and when things happen in real life, it will be like, okay, we're deceived. There's this sentence that Dr. Ayman said that in the criticism course, Adam Shah example, and I think it's so true, like regarding the idealistic.
In terms of ideas or in terms of language?
No, in terms of how idealized
Okay.
they are.
Okay, so does this mean we tend to like realistic poetry more? To find ourselves, or at least trust, do we trust more realistic poets more?
At least for me, yes.
Okay, why wouldn't you trust, like generally speaking again, why wouldn't you trust a poet?
I think not all poets must be taken for granted.
Okay.
Because sometimes they only write poetry for the sake of getting some support in a way or another, whether financial support or social. So
But be careful, many poets don't make much money these days. Only if you are a successful novel writer, novelist, you could do that. But short story writers, poets, they don't make much money.
Yes, they sometimes praise someone.
Okay.
We mustn't praise or respect.
Okay, so sometimes poets, not all poets are good people. They do bad stuff. They do. Would you like poetry written by somebody who you don't like? If the man or the woman is bad, like, but they write good poetry, so to speak, would you still read their poetry?
Yes. Even to understand their personality.
Okay. Please.
I like the poetry of Percy Shelley, but I don't like the character of Shelley.
The man himself.
The man himself.
So you're trying to detach. There's something that this of the author. There's this theory that once authors, writers write stuff, halas, it belongs to us, to the readers. And it also means that the writing is the sum of everything around them. It's not only them, because you will always be quoting, inspired by other writers and other authors. Now, these are very excellent ideas you have there. Think about them and see how you could develop these ideas. Now, for us as Arabs, we have always appreciated poetry. Poetry has been part and parcel of our life, of our heritage. It's probably the most significant thing we had from the Arabs. In addition, like ancient Arabs or like 1,000, 2,000 years ago, in addition to later on to Islam and the Quran and the Sunnah, right? And the only miracle in Islam for Prophet Muhammad was the Quran, because the Arabs were excellent poets with rhetoric, with language, with words. They were the best of the best, how they used language and how they expressed themselves. Now in the Quran, there's a whole surah, a whole chapter named after the poets, as shu'ara, and again indicating how significant these people are. However, they're not mentioned like we expect them to be mentioned, because the verse says وَالشُّعَرَاءُ يَتَّبِعُهُمُ الْغَاوُونَ أَلَمْ تَرَ أَنَّهُم فِي كُلِّ وَادٍ يَهِيمُونَ وَأَنَّهُمْ يَقُولُونَ مَا لَا يَفْعَلُونَ. Now, this is significant, meaning, translate the gist that poets are only followed by people who don't follow the truth, because they roam, the literal translation, they roam in every valley. They fluctuate, they change. One time they're here, and the other day they're doing the opposite. Sometime they would be praising this man, and then next month, they would be attacking him or criticizing him. And this is significant, because during the time of Prophet Muhammad, there was Hassan ibn Thabit, the famous poet. Prophet Muhammad kind of like brought him very close to him. He made him his own personal poet. And he even ordered him to write, gave him the order to write poetry against the people attacking, hating the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, at that time. And he even, he made him sit on a pulpit, the minbar, and nobody else of the Prophet's companions had this place, because he was a poet. And now the interesting thing is that Hassan was not a warrior, he was not a fighter. We talk about a time when fighting was probably one of the most significant things, right? But writing poetry perhaps was even more significant. So for this, because poets are significant, Prophet Muhammad brought this man, Hassan ibn Thabit, closer to him, probably closer than any of the other companions. And he always asked him to write poetry, to attack, to criticize the people of Quraysh. And for this, it's like this is the verse, okay, in Arabic. However, there is always an exception. So there is no general blanket condemnation of poets. And look at what sort of poets that are praised here. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمَلُوا. Except, so all poets are bad except those who believe and do. And some of you mentioned this in passing, that poets say stuff but they don't do it. They are people of words rather than people of action. So I think this is one important thing that we look for in poets. We want poets who are probably realistic, like you said, connected to life, who push us to do new things, to break new ground, who speak our minds, who lead by example, but also poets who themselves they practice what they preach. They practice what they preach. Look at this. وَانْتَصَرُوا مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا ظُلِمُوا, how poetry can be an act of resistance. I like this translation. It's like literal. Don't you see that in every valley there? I think in Arabic, in the Quran, this is one of the most beautiful images. أَلَمْ تَرَ أَنَّهُمْ فِي كُلِّ وَادٍ يَهِيمُونَ. When somebody yahim, yani, when somebody goes into a place aimlessly, just walks around wandering aimlessly. This is what yahimun means. Like they could be going there, they just can be writing poetry, like you said, for no reason or for no purpose. Okay, so despite the fact that Hassan ibn Thabit did not fight well, he wasn't a warrior, he was made special by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He even prayed saying that may the angel Gabriel will support him in his defense of Allah and his Prophet. And then I move, probably an example I mentioned here, how poets try to bring change, affect change. This is a story by a famous poet called Jarir. And Jarir, you know Jarir, Al-Akhtal, Jarir, and Farazakh. Jarir was a genius poet in many ways. He was famous for his satire. We always love satire. Now, in one of his poems, he was in front of the Caliph. And the Arabs, like we have in English literature, in the Renaissance literature, how the opening is significant. The first impression, the opening. That's why some people didn't like John Donne, because he had these rough and tough and abrupt, openings. Death be not proud, spit in my face, batter my heart, and all these tough openings here. And now, instead of opening the poem smoothly, sweetly, like many poets did, he was like, أتصحو فؤادك غير صاحي عشية هم صحبك بالرواح. Meaning, are you awake? Are you fully awake? Are you asleep? And now the Caliph, who loved poetry very much, hated this very much. How would you? Why would you? How dare you? So he held something, the ink holder, I don't know what you call it, and he just hit him with it and injured him. So there was ink and blood all over his face, Jarir's face. And the Caliph looked away. He didn't like that. But Jarir knew what he was coming to. And then he reached a line of verse where he said, أَلَسْتُمْ خَيْرَ مَنْ رَكِبَ الْمَطَايَا وَأَنْدَ الْعَالَمِينَ بُطُونَهَا. Meaning, aren't you the most fearless fighters and the most generous people of all? And when he got to this line, the Caliph stood, looked at him, and he clapped and said, Bala, 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 I like this. Now, many of us could say that this is a mistake. Like, Jarir committed a mistake, and this is true. It could be that he committed a mistake, but there is another interpretation. It could be deliberate. This man is a genius. He's a poet, in the sense that he could have done this in order to change things, I like poetry that subverts the authority of people, like people in authority, patriarchy and everything. Poetry that attacks these, symbols of power, of authority, is the poetry that appeals to me most. And I read this here. I think Jarir, by doing this, is trying to do two things. Number one, to shake the image of the caliph. And also, number two, to tell other poets and people that there are many ways to start a poem. You don't have to start, standing on the ruins and, being all sweet and everything. A poem can begin like this in a tough and a rough way. And talking about openings, we always go to Abu Nuwas, one of my favorite poets. Abu Nuwas wasn't an Arab, he was a Persian. And sadly for this, some critics didn't like him, just for the fact that he was a Persian. He was alcoholic, and again, people hated him for that. But remember, we don't talk about the person himself here. We talk about the poetry. So this man, again, how he was changing, if not ideas and society and customs, changing the way poets would be writing. He hated very much what like for hundreds and hundreds of years, Arab poets would open the poems again standing on the ruins and remains of the beloved's tribe or something. And I think that must have been boring for some people, for many people. Imagine you reading or listening to a poem, like 100 poems and 1,000 poems, all opening, standing over the ruins of something. So change was significant. Again, poets would always start with this. So he's قُلْ لِمَنْ مَرَّ عَلَى رَسْمٍ دَرَسْ وَاقِفًا. Till those people who stand over the ruins of why don't you sit down? Have a seat. Sit down. رجليك تعبوك تريح. ما ضر لو كان And I showed you some of the memes. I showed you. Again, this is another poem, another line. ما ضر لو كان جلس. This is from Abu Nuwas, all of it. فما الوقوف على الأطلال من شأني. I am not a poet. I'm not a person who would stand over. I don't do this. I don't stand over ruins. It's not something I do. I like doing. And لتلك أبكي ولا أبكي لمنزلة. I don't cry or weep over these things. كانت تحل بها هند وأسماء. I weep for something that happened, for an experience. I don't weep over. And listen. This could be because, again, Abu Nuwas wanted to change the way, but I don't know. Is it because also he doesn't have roots in wherever he was in Iraq or here and there? It's like place doesn't mean much to him because this is not where he is from originally. He was born somewhere else. I don't know. Could be both. And I find this very striking. لا يرحم الله عيني من بكى حجر. This is really extreme. ولا شفى وجد من يصبو إلى وتدي. That's really extreme. This is supplication. May God not have mercy on any eye that cries over the ruins or the remains. That's very extreme. I did my memes myself. I try sometimes. I love this. I never understood this until somebody memed this woman. So this woman was tasting something. Sometimes you eat something that you hate very much, and just before you spit it out, you thought, wait a minute. This is really different. I have tasted this. I'm very adventurous. Wherever I travel, I like to try the food. So sometimes like, oh my God, I want to spit it out. But then you just give it one moment, and it's like, wow, this is different, special. So, قل لمن مر على رسم درس واقفا ما ضر لو جلس. Or this famous, like how most Arab poets would be قفا نبكي من ذكرى حبيب ومنزلي بسقط اللوى بين الدخول فحوملي etc. But then ما ضر لو كان جلس. Sit down. You don't have to stand. Now look at Al-Mutanabbi. We know Al-Mutanabbi is perhaps, some argue that he's the greatest poet of all times, even surpassing, Shakespeare and Dante and those great poets. It's still an opinion that some people have. He's no doubt the greatest Arab poet of all time. Now, Al-Mutanabbi was special. Was a poet. I'm not sure if you read and if you know. Like, you will be amazed how many of the wisdoms were said by Al-Mutanabbi. مصائب قوم عند قوم فوائد. It's something from Al-Mutanabbi. One man's poison is another man's meat. ما لجرح بميت إيلام. A dead one doesn't hurt. Most of the idioms, the proverbs, the expressions we know I don't say most, but like some of them come originally from Al-Mutanabbi. Sha'ar al-Hikmah, I think he was described, the poet of wisdom. Anyway,
But again, he was a horrible person.
I don't care.
Yeah, it's just saying about what we said. Like, can you love the poetry of
The
someone
thing is
without
that
loving
you need to read Al-Mutanabbi. You have to, really. When this man was looking to be, appointed, some emir here or there. And he was, keeping with Saif al-Dawla, and every time, like, Saif al-Dawla would be rejecting him. Like, okay, stay around, write poetry for me, and that's it. So he left him and he went to Egypt, Kafur al-Ikhshidi. Again, hoping that Kafur al-Ikhshidi would be giving him what? Some place to rule. And when he went to Egypt, he was heading to Egypt, he wrote one of the most beautiful poems of all time. Again, in anticipating, preparing for the meeting with Kafur al-Ikhshidi. He stayed there in vain. Kafur al-Ikhshidi was not also willing to give him some place to rule or something. And he left Egypt, heading back to Syria, and he wrote again one of the most fascinating poems of all time. So it's the same thing. ألم ترى أنهم في كل واد يهيمون, praising this man and مش بس attacking him. قصيدة المشهورة, the famous poem, بيقول فيها عيد بأية حال عدت يا عيد لما مضى أم لأمر فيك تجديد أما الأحبة فالبيداء دونهم. Like Saif al-Dawla, it's just one desert and I'll be there. وليت دونك بيد دونها بيد. I just want to be as far from you, Kafur al-Ikhshidi, as possible. And he says one of those lines that very memorable. He talks about the people there in Egypt. ما يقبض الموت نفسا من نفوسهم إلا وفي يده من نتنها عود. Those people stink that even when the angel of death takes their souls, it brings, a stick, so it doesn't touch them. It just takes their souls with a stick. That's extreme. So when he was running away from Egypt, leaving Egypt behind, some people whose mother Al-Mutanabbi satirized were coming after him, and he wanted to run away. Until one of his followers, one of his servants said, "Sir, wasn't it you who said, Al-Khaylu wal-Laylu wal-Bayda'u ta'rifuni wal-Sayfu wal-Rumhu wal-Qirtas wal-Qalamu? Didn't you say that, I don't know, the horse, the steed, the night, the desert know me, the sword, the spear, the paper and pen as well? Like, didn't you say this? Didn't you praise yourself as the greatest of fighters? صحبت في الفلوات الوحش منفردة حتى تعجب مني القور والأكرم. But he wasn't a fighter. He was a fighter in his own words, but because he wanted to keep his word, he wanted to tell people that poets are not liars, that poets are to be trusted. He stood and chose to fight rather than run away. And he knew he's going to be killed. And that's why he said to the man, قتلتني قتلك الله. You killed me. You reminded me of my own poetry. You made me stop and fight. I'm not a fighter. But because I said something, I have to keep my word. That's very beautiful. If you don't like this about Al-Mutanabbi, I don't know what else you're going to like about him.
Why in the first place?
I don't know. Poets say stuff. Now, we move like to Mahmoud Sami al-Barudi, one of the poets of I don't know when he lived exactly, but like 150 years ago or so, when Arab poetry was in really steep decline until Mahmoud Sami al-Barudi came with the Renaissance or whatever, the modern Renaissance movement of Arabic poetry, the classical Arabic poetry. This man was a fighter, and he was also a poet. That's why he was described as the Lord of the sword and the pen, Rabb al-Sayf wal-Qalam. And again, you see what I'm doing here? It's trying to connect how words and deeds are usually there with poets. And it's probably these poets that we like more, because they practice what they preach rather than just. And we go to another example from Palestinian culture and poetry. Abdurrahim Mahmoud. You know Abdurrahim Mahmoud? Again, he was a great fighter. He was a Palestinian Fidai commando, and he was also a great poet. In his poem, famous poem, سأحمل روحي على راحتي, we all know this by heart. وألقي بها في مهاوي الردى فإما حياة تسر الصديق وإما مات يغيظ العدا. I'll carry my soul on the palm of my hand and throw it to the abyss of death. It's either a life that pleases a friend or friends, or death that teases and spites the enemy or something. Now, what makes this special is that Mahmoud Darwish died defending his land, died fighting the Zionist occupation of Palestine. He died a fighter. He said something, he preached us something. Probably these words come to life. He comes to life every time we read this. He showed us what to do, what to say, and how to do it. And I'm not sure what other Palestinian poets you like, but for many, Mahmoud Darwish usually comes on top of the list. So this is some kind of translation. Now I'll again fast forward to Tamim al-Barghouti. We mentioned Tamim very many times. We studied a poem by Tamim. Again, for many people, Tamim is the hope we have, that we'll always have great people, great thinkers, great poets to look up to. For many people, the fact that Tamim is usually writing anti-occupation poetry, resistance poetry, makes him special. But also, he appeals to many of us. He's not only a Palestinian poet or an Egyptian poet, he's also now a global poet, a poet that would address almost all issues around the Arab world, especially with the Arab Spring and everything. Probably the fact that he is young and he was very much involved in the Arab Spring is significant. Now, I remember when the Arab Spring started in Egypt, the very next day, Tamim was on Al Jazeera reciting one of his poems, Ya Masri Hanit Ubanit Kullaha Kam Yom, and this poem, it's a beautiful poem. And a friend of mine called me and he said, your friend Tamim, he's not my friend, I just like him. Your friend Tamim will be thrown behind the sun. You know the expression, how Arab regimes would, exile critics throw them behind the sun. And I said, because my friend wanted, we know many people usually when things about to change are very careful what to say, what not to say, what to do and what not to do, because we're not sure who's going to come out victorious. So we wait. But this is what ordinary people do. This is what you and I do. We just wait. So we're careful not to be, persecuted here or there. But great people, great poets want to lead the change, like Reem said there. So the fact that he was there, one of the early people to support the uprising, the Arab Spring, it means a lot to his poetry and to his name and to what he was doing. He's just not a poet like was it Marah who suggested that they would usually say something and the other day say the very opposite or something. So the fact that he was there early in the days, calling for people to come out, to rise, makes him also a special poet. Now, even if you don't practice what you preach, sometimes again your words are enough. You don't have to be a poet. Remember we said something about children, that the child, Wordsworth saying the child is the father of man and something like this. Children don't have to do anything to influence us, to change us, right? They just have to be there with their, crazy stuff. Now, these are two poets, Palestinian poets. They're not fighters. They didn't fight. They didn't carry guns or stones or whatever. They just wrote poetry. And still for that, the Israeli occupation looked at them in the way Israeli occupation looks at Palestinians. Moshe Dayan is reported to have said about Fadwa Tuqan, he's a war criminal. He likened her reading one of her poems to facing 20 enemy commandos, fighters. So one poem by Fadwa Tuqan was viewed by this Israeli war criminal as 20 fighters. So words, so is it, again, I find it difficult sometimes to separate words from deeds, what you do. Because what you say can easily influence and incite others. You use the term incite and prompt others to resist. The same thing happened to Darien Tatur, just 3-4 years ago. Darien Tatur is a Palestinian poet who was sent to prison by Israel for writing poetry. Again, under the fake accusation of incitement. And she spent a lot of time in prison, and she remained for a long time under house arrest. If this doesn't show us how significant poetry is, I don't know what does. Now going back to our friends here, Wordsworth and Shelley. Many of you like Shelley. You could like something in the poet and not like something else. And again, I don't talk about the poet as the man. I talk about what they say, his poetry. You could like this poem but not that poem, and that's okay. Now Wordsworth is accused by many people as the poet, an escapist poet. Some people would make fun of him and accuse him of being a tree hugger. He would just be leaving the sins and the corruptions of the city and all the social and political decay behind, and just close your eyes. Imagine in the past when you were a child and life was good, life was innocent, life was beautiful, or leave everything behind and go to nature, to the bosom of nature, and just do it. I find this unfair sometimes, like tree hugger is too much. I shouldn't be using this, but I could say that he's an escapist. Some radicals might even accuse him of being complicit, because if you're silent, the sentence, the statement, if you're silent in times of injustice, you're complicit. Because especially if you're a poet, you should be speaking out loud and clear about against injustices, like we've seen with William Blake. But again, that's the difference. William Blake was a Londoner. Now, for many people, the fact that William Wordsworth was calling for some kind of revolution in poetry and words and language is enough. Because for them, without Wordsworth, we wouldn't have had Shelley. He paved the way. He started it. It was Wordsworth, it was Coleridge who started this whole great movement of radical change in terms of language and poetry, and also in terms of ideas and probably political ideas. And by the way, during his lifetime, there were many files that were declassified later on. We're talking about the times and age of revolutions, the American Revolution, the Industrial Revolution, but also the French Revolution. And England was like literally shaking because they were afraid another revolution is going to take place in England. So the British intelligence was spying on both Wordsworth and Coleridge. And they were like, you can look up the information and the reports those spies were writing about Coleridge. And I don't know how they reacted when they were like, oh my God, those people keep going to Lake District and staying in this cottage. I'm not sure what they're planning, what they're going to do. So they would be sending somebody to listen, and I don't know, Wordsworth would be saying, I wandered lonely as a cloud. And was this man or the intelligence, like, were they trying to decipher this, to decode it? Is this a symbol of something? I wandered lonely as what? Is this, does this, I don't know. But this is something else. So you could criticize Wordsworth for not being, at least as radical as we want a poet to be. But don't forget what he did in itself was a revolution that changed people's mentalities and people's sensibilities and people's way of viewing the world, of writing about the world. But Shelley is a different man. Shelley was openly, and by the way, what we like about Shelley is something that many people don't like about Shelley. They say he was clear, he was open. So he was like a political preacher saying us, okay, rise. Go, start up a revolution. I don't think this is a very simplistic view of Shelley, but Shelley, in many of his poems, was openly calling for a revolution, to rise up. And I'm quoting something here just for the sake of... In defense of poetry, an essay by Shelley, he says, poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. They are the members of the parliament, the lawmakers, that's legislators. The legislative council here, Palestinian Legislative Council. So poets, they are the leaders, they are the lawmakers of the society, but they are unofficial. And also it was him who harshly criticized the society, the British society, as being a society where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And in the Ode to the West Wind, I'm just taking extracts here. Look at how he says, he's calling for change, destroyer and preserver. This is the wind of change, I don't know, or revolution. It destroys, but it should also, it destroys to build. Here or here. He's also here, drive my dead thoughts to quicken a new birth. And also if you look there in the bottom here, the trumpet of a prophecy, O wind, if winter comes, can spring be far behind? If winter comes, can spring be far behind? In the Mask of Anarchy, I mentioned earlier about the massacre of Manchester when the British police shot dead many protesters. Again, that's a very beautiful long poem where he openly calls for this. And this is again beautiful. I don't know why some people just don't like Shelley for being very obvious. Men of England as of glory, heroes of unwritten story, nurslings of one mighty mother, hopes of her and one another. Rise like lions after slumber. Wake up like lions when they wake up after sleep. Slumber is sleep. You know slumber party, when you go to somebody's place and have fun and sleep there. Rise like lions after slumber in unvanquishable number. Shake your chains to earth like dew, which in sleep had fallen on you. Ye are many, they are few. People are many, the police are few. Okay, before I go back to Ozymandias, I want you to say something if you have to say something, please. Comment on something.
No, I have a parody.
Comment on what I said. Probably we can have time for that, for parodies. Please.
Describing William Wordsworth as being not a Londoner, as like, I believe this reminds me of the poet that said like "ما ضر لو كان جلد." I think that like this Arab poet, he tried to do something.
He's an outsider, you mean?
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
Maybe like these two can be related. Like yes,
True,
we do not
yeah.
accept this, but we accept this. So this is kind of disturbing.
I agree. If you are an outsider, you don't feel. But again, you are a poet. You have to be, special. Even if you're not there, you have. Even Wordsworth said this: the extra comprehensive sensibility that poets own that other people don't. And it doesn't mean he didn't know what was going on in London and around the UK at that time. Please.
Actually, I love both Wordsworth and Shelley. And at least people call Wordsworth an escapist, but at least Wordsworth as a man was true to himself. He didn't pretend to be something he was not.
Is Shelley pretending something he
Yes.
was not? Okay.
Yeah, Shelley had so many ideas that he expressed, but in his poetry. But as a person, he never, put them into action.
Do you know that the second generation of the Romantics were very young, even died young? Shelley and Keats and Byron, all of them. They were jinxed. And you might not know this. They were, when Wordsworth and Coleridge were writing poetry, they were not born yet. They were born, they wrote poetry, they died, and Wordsworth didn't want to die. He was just... So he became like this patriarchal figure. Even, please read what Byron says about Wordsworth and Coleridge. He attacks them openly in his poetry.
I'm not saying that Shelley, all of Shelley's works are against what he actually did. No, his ideas are present in his poetry. But the thing is, a lot of his ideas were not, as I said, put into action in his life. If we
which Romantic poet was more active in his life than others, than just being a romantic and lying there? Do you know? It was Byron. Byron was a fighter. He was fighting against the Ottoman Empire somewhere in Cyprus, I guess.
But then Byron was he was rich. He had the means.
Shelley was rich. Shelley was also rich. Shelley was rich. Okay, so 3 years ago, when we talk about Ozymandias, going back to Ozymandias and Ramses the second, or Ramses II, when we talk about pharaohs in Egypt, those great pharaohs had many statues for them, just one, not one. So the poem talks about one of these things. And I found this like this is very moving. Like the statue of Ozymandias, Ramses II, in many ways like describe, I'm not sure if he was talking about this very one or something else, but look at this. Ozymandias, king of kings, look on my works submerged in sewage and despair or not. Okay, look at how, wow. Imagine yourself 5,000 years ago stepping on the, climbing and stepping on this man's, it is huge, yeah, of course. Now, this is in reality the man. Remember the text says, the hand, the feet, and the heart, that's something, and how this sculptor will read these passions. So the traveler was telling the speaker and the poet, that the sculpture is a perfect representation of Ozymandias. It's perfect. But look at this. This is really, like, in many ways, very symmetrical, very well engineered, very well done, right? It's perfect. Look at the eyes, the ears, the nose, very symmetrical. Everything is perfect.
Where's the frown?
Maybe some other. This is stone cold. In reality, this is Ozymandias. I looked this because this is some kind of reconstruction. This is his mummy. I don't think this in any way is similar to this. He was one of the greatest pharaohs in ancient Egyptian history. I don't know what this brings to mind other than nightmares. But in no way this looks like this. Probably it's similar in a bit, in a way, I don't know. And then this one. Compare the almost real picture to the sculpture. I'll come back to this in a bit. Now, going back to the text so we can wrap things up. Remember I told you this is, we mentioned this in passing, but I want to repeat things so we have more information. I said that this could be read in many ways. There is an American critic, M.H. Abrams, who drew this. He said there are 4 main categories. Almost all literary theories can be categorized under these 4 parts. But he doesn't draw a square, he does a triangle. He says there are theories that examine the text, the relationship between the text and the world, the universe. There are theories that examine the relationship between the text and the writer, the poet. Expressive, this is mimetic theories, you know, theories of mimesis. This is expressive theories. And there are theories that study the relationship between the text and the reader, the audience. What is the 4th category? Thank you very much. The theories that examine the text, the relation, like what we have, the words on the page. We are involved in a process of close reading of the text. This is M.H. Abrams, mimetic theories. The relationship between the text and the world, the universe, how close the representation is. And then the expressive theories, basically the romantic theory here, how poetry is self-expression, and how the poet and the poem are one, inseparable. And then the pragmatic theories, the didactic theories, where poetry is written to teach and delight. So you examine the relationship between, you examine the impact the text has on the reader, the audience. And then finally, the objective theories, usually this is 20th century theories like new criticism and even structuralism, formalism, and deconstruction, etc. Objective theories, they say the text is self-enclosed, autonomous, you know, independent of the surrounding, even the social circumstances and the life of the author. The meaning of the text is in the text. All you need to do is to look at the words on the page, to do a close reading, to examine the form, the shape, the structure, the language, the literary devices, the ironies, the puns, the ambiguity, the paradoxes. And if you understand this, if you see the, the binary opposites, you get the tension, you understand the poem. Okay? So if we go back to the text, like we did last time, new criticism, a new critic, this is what we usually do. We focus more on what the text tells us without the... So this thing, remember we said that the sonnet here, the poem is a sonnet.
14 lines.
We describe this sonnet as,
Formless.
thank you very much, some kind of a formless sonnet in the sense that it doesn't have a regular rhyme scheme. Even the rhyme scheme itself here has like 3 imperfect rhymes. It doesn't have clear structure in terms of octaves, sestets, couplets. We don't know where things go, where things end. Now, usually we need to make this observation for us to ask a very significant question. Why is this? In order to look for the meaning. Why is this there? Why does the poet not follow Shakespeare or Petrarch? This is the kind of question I would be asking you in your exams. You should be aware of that. So I might ask you, why doesn't Shelley follow the Shakespearean sonnet or the Petrarchan sonnet or both? I could be more specific. In this case, this question is a little bit general. I want you to zoom in for the specific point. I want you to start the answer, your topic sentence, saying that Shelley uses a formless and irregular sonnet. First, you need to show me where it is, why, how it is irregular. And second, you need to connect this with the theme of the topic. So in many ways, what do we have inside the poem? What we have inside the poem is ruins, remains, wreck, right? We have something that's shattered and broken. We have the remains of something. So in many ways, I see that he is echoing this. He's echoing this as if he's saying we don't, Arabs, Africans, we don't deserve a perfect sonnet. So when the poem is about decline of authority, I usually like to use this term because there is less, trunkless, lifeless, 3 lesses, right? And boundless, and also rhymeless, formless. So it's about lessness, about decay, about destructiveness, about transience of time. This is a romantic theme in many ways. The second thing we need to look at is, we mentioned the rhymes, the puns here, the possible puns in lies. The shattered visage, lies. Lies there is sitting there, lying around. But also lies not telling the truth. So the facial expressions are lying to us. And also mock, which has 2 meanings. Mock to imitate, to copy, and mock to ridicule, to make fun of.
Yeah.
But look at how beautiful this is, how this changes because time changes. At that time, mock meant only mock, imitate. And he imitated the facial expressions, these passions, perfectly. But now that it is broken, destroyed, shattered, half sunk, and nothing but decay and desert and sands around, this means mocking, make fun of. Now the most significant thing, probably one of the most significant ironies in English poetry is, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty and when we look, what do we find? It's ironic because it says, I am King of Kings, but in reality, look at him. He's no king, he's nothing. Even the greatest of us will die also. But I also want you to think of how now, for example, when, all sculptures have been fixed and rebuilt by scientists in the past century. So it was all standing and powerful, and then it was destroyed, and now it's going back to... So I think this changes the way we react to this. Imagine yourself living in the time of Ozymandias and passing by this. You would be shaking, right? You'd be like, oh, because it is intimidating. This was a sign. He is even calling us to despair.
Also, he commands his people to look and...
Not his people. the mighty. Like some suggested that this could be a call for the enemies. Look, you can't defeat us, which changes many things about him. Now, both, the irony and the puns create ambiguity, create a paradox here. Does he mean this? Does he mean that? What does it mean? Does it mean lying? Does it mean just sitting there? Now, analyzing this is what a new critic would be doing. Remember we said post-colonialism with Edward Said, another post-colonial, would be interested on how the text is constructing the idea, the image of the other, us. People of the Middle East, Asia, and Africa, and India, and probably the Caribbean, South America, like people who are not European, white, etc. I love this statement by Edward Said from Orientalism. The Orient, us, Sharq, has helped to define Europe or the West as its contrasting image. We always want something to compare to so we understand where we lie. Contrasting image, idea, personality, experience, etc. So we were significant because if we are backward, they are advanced. If we are inferior, they are superior. If we are savages, uncivilized, they are civilized. And there's this thing about the white man, the moral obligation to come here and to civilize us. Yes, to take all our gold and raw materials and everything, but it's their job to come. It's their moral obligation to come and to civilize us. So Edward Said would be questioning how he's constructing this idea, this negative idea about the Middle East, leaving everything and focusing on how the sand, the desert, the antique, the shuttered, how he presents Arabs or Africans as people who weep over the spilt milk. We are invested in the past. We're not invested in the present or even in the future. I also find two things interesting. How did this traveler get there? We don't know. We're not told. How did he understand the inscription written in ancient Egyptian language? My assumption is that there must be a guide and a translator, or one person who did this thing. But what is he doing to them, to the locals? He's erasing them. They don't exist. They don't exist. Exactly like what Zionist poetry, literature did to Palestine and Palestinians. Palestinians never existed. It's a land without a people, waiting for a people without a land. And when Palestinians exist there, they're savages. They're uncivilized. And I also find it interesting because I'm sure some of you want to be translators. Sadly, translators don't take a lot of credit. They're usually erased. If you do a great job, usually people don't care about you. If you just make one tiny little mistake, you have to pay for that. Okay, look at the feminist reading here. And this can be seen as overstretching by some of you. Now, there's this book I'm taking this from that says women have been traditionally taught to read as men. And I find this very interesting because every class, you yourselves, when I asked you about the people last time, you spoke about the traveler, the sculptor, and the poet as he. So you assume that these are all men. So women are erased. There are no women. Some of you might say, but does that mean this is anti-feminism or women are underrepresented? It does. Imagine a text. If the text has 7 characters, 7 people, and all the people are women, the first question people will ask, why are all the women? Why don't we ask the same question about texts that is overwhelmed, dominated by men? Because we are trained, sadly, to read as men. We should change this. So women should begin to liberate themselves from the notion of universal reader, because the universal reader is usually assumed to be a man. So how might reading as a woman be different? You will pay attention to things. You will look at this as something that is a world dominated by men, that women have no place here. It doesn't mean Shelley is anti-feminist. That's another question. You need to examine more poems to judge this. But could be Shelley saying something else, something different, like how a society, how Ozymandias symbolizes patriarchy, the man-made rules, the man-controlled society, how men control everything, and that's the end of. This is where men lead us to decay, to arrogance, to hubris, to weeping over spilt milk, over the past, and it's time for women to take place, to do something to change this real. Think about this. You don't have to agree with me with this reading, but think about this. Because there's this, always, please, think about how we have always been trained as, even most of you here, if you paid attention, when you talk about the poet, you say he. Even when some of you talk about the reader, you say he. Why would you assume that the reader is a he? The poet is a he. Okay, so I'll stop here, but before, if you have any question, any point to raise, please do. Okay, thank you very much. If you have a question, you can stay behind or you can rush back to your other classes.